Well, howdy, friends, and welcome to the Roundup Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Tidwell. Thanks for joining us today. We have the Executive Director-elect for the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention with us today in Nathan Lorick. Nathan Lorick is a friend of mine. He's actually the one who originally hired me for the role that I hold here as Collegiate Associate at the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. He was the Evangelism Director here for a period of time, and then he left to lead the Colorado Baptist Convention. And now he is back as the Executive Director-elect, so probably sometime this summer that will be kind of all shored up. So excited to have him on to just talk about his new role here, the vision for where we plan on going and how that's going to affect next generation in collegiate ministries here at the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. You know, I think for some of us here on the podcast, maybe we're not totally aware of convention life and how that relates to the local church. And so Nathan's going to kind of flesh some of that out. So I wanted you guys to get to know him. I wanted you to hear his heartbeat because it is the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention that supports this podcast through the cooperative program giving. And just kind of want you guys to know who's leading it and his vision and his just really affections for you as college pastors and leaders in local churches. So it's a great podcast. Take a listen as I interview Nathan Lorick, the Executive Director-elect at the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention.
You're listening to the Roundup Podcast, a podcast on reaching the college campus, developing leaders, and sending out kingdom multipliers. This podcast is created by the Southern Baptists of Texas Convention and provided through cooperative program giving.
I think I maybe sent you an email or came up to your office and said, hey, I think I'd be interested in the collegiate associate job with absolutely no experience. And so you took a shot, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, it's worked out well for you and for the SBTC.
Yeah, man. Well, I do appreciate that. Well, Nathan, so you're the Executive Director-elect of the SBTC, which means you're kind of in this process of, we have executive board. Well, we're filming this in April, but this will be in a week or so, but it's going to kind of finalize all that. But that means you're kind of in this process of becoming the executive director. But before that, tell us a little bit about yourself, man, who you are, where you're from. Tell us about your family.
Yeah, so grew up in Louisiana, Shreveport, and became a follower of Jesus when I was young, but throughout high school kind of ran from God, circumstances that would take longer than a podcast to share, but God grabbed my heart when I was 17. I tell people I should say it this way, I gave my heart to Jesus when I was 17, but I fully surrendered my life to him. Let me back up. I gave my heart to Jesus when I was a young kid. I fully surrendered my life to him when I was 17. And went off to college, had a chance to go play college football and decided not to. I was kind of tired of football and
dude, what positions you play?
Middle linebacker, of course.
Yeah, I can see that.
And, just God had called me to ministry. And though the offer I had and the option I had was to go to play for a Christian school, man, I just really felt like God had kind of put in my heart to focus on ministry and begin learning what it means to give my life to this. So I took a step away and said, I don't want to play football. So it took me to a different school, ETBU. And there I met my wife. Had just a great time there in college. We got married young, got married our junior year in college.
Nice.
And so started serving on staff at churches. And anyways, one thing led to another and served here and then went to Colorado. And now I've come back and really excited to be back here.
Awesome, man. So college football, said, no, I'm not taking that route. Mm-hmm. Go to East Texas Baptist, and then from there, because I know you pastored a church. You said you preached 12 times, and then you started pastoring a church. Right?
So when I was in college, I was a ministry major.
Yeah.
And so they had back then they would have churches that would call into the ministry department, mostly rural churches, saying, hey, we want to give a college student a chance to preach who's going to be a pastor. And so they'd send us out to these schools, man, and they would send out evaluation forms for the people to pass out in the congregation. Here you are, so inexperienced, nervous as can be to preach, but also looking out and they're not taking notes, they're making notes about your preaching, your delivery, your introduction, the illustrations. And then you'd go back and follow up with whoever was supervising you in that role, and they would say, okay, let's talk about the feedback. And for most, it would have been incredible. For me, it was pretty humiliating. And so I'd preached probably a dozen times or so, maybe a few more throughout college. And then when I went to pastor my first church, I was 24. I had just turned 24, just the 3 months before that. And yeah, let me rephrase that. I probably had developed 12 sermons of my own, and just didn't have a lot of experience. And I went to this church in East Texas, and there were 33 people that voted on me, and I thought I was Billy Graham, and it was the Taj Mahal. Couldn't believe people would let me be their pastor, and man, just what an incredible opportunity they afforded me. Loved me, let me make mistakes, supported me, and. Man, we looked up, and God was just blessing and moving, and it was a really fun time. And then I transitioned to another church as pastor when I was 26. So I was that first church about 2.5 years, and then I transitioned to Malakoff, First Baptist Malakoff in East Texas. And when I was 26, stayed about 5 years. Yeah. And again, just one of the most incredible ministry opportunities I've ever had. Yeah. And
well, you had a church planting stint in there too, didn't you? Or you were kind of gotten, but it got derailed, right?
Yeah. So right out of college, I was a youth pastor at college, and right out of college, my wife and I moved to Tennessee to plant a church. Knew nothing about it. Knew no one there. Didn't raise any money. Yeah. Could write a book on how not to plant a church. It lasted about a year, and honestly, we had gathered people. That wasn't hard. But through some life circumstances, my wife got pregnant with our first son, got in a car accident. The story goes on. Yeah. Some things. We just kind of looked up and said, man, this isn't going to work. We need to get closer to family. Yeah. And so kind of during that time, God opened the door for us to transition back to Texas on staff at a church. Yeah. And, he redeems all things, Mitch. I mean, I went to that church, was there about a year when God opened the door for me to go pastor this church, my first church. And the way that happened was a lady called the pastor of the church I was serving at and said, you married my granddaughter 2 years ago and out in our community, and we're having a hard time finding anybody to come be our pastor. Would you happen to know someone? Well, he and I just had a conversation just the week before. And he said, I have somebody that might do it. Yeah. And man, it was truly a blessing and terrifying at the same time. So.
Wow. And so Malakoff, and then you came here to the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention to be the evangelism director. How old were you in that?
That would have been in 2012. I was 31.
Were you really 31?
I just turned 31 when I came as director of evangelism. Man. Yeah, I'm old now. So I served 5 years, and then I went to Colorado when I was 36. Yeah. And just transitioned back and hit 40 in February. So right before I was called back here, about 2 weeks before I was called back here, I hit 40. So anyways, I'm not the young guy anymore. At one point, I was the youngest pastor in SBTC convention at one point. And I kind of led the Young Pastors Network before there was such a thing. And so now I'm not the young guy anymore, man. There's generations coming after me, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah. And love pouring into them. So
well, if you're getting older, if people start calling you to preach at the classic session.
Yeah, well, Hey, man. Hey, listen, I pastored classic sessions for a while.
That's right, man. That's right. Well, hey, walk us through a little bit. So, you're called to ministry, you're doing local church ministry, and then this role at the convention opens when you're 31 years old. What's because some of our audience may not be totally familiar with what the convention means and what it's for. Why would you make that jump? Take us through that.
Yeah, Mitch, it was hard. So I didn't grow up Southern Baptist. Yep. I didn't know what Southern Baptist was until I was serving in my first Southern Baptist church, even though the church that God grabbed my heart in when I was 17 was an SBC church. They never talked about it. Yeah. I didn't know what it was. And so I didn't really learn until I was on staff, and I had to ask those questions. What does this mean? This is not just a church in the South. And no, it's a part of a greater network. And here's how we partner together. And it was just like eye-opening, phenomenal information that led me to understand the ability to have a synergistic approach to the gospel and advancement of the gospel. So I was serving on staff at a church, and then God began to call me to pastor. And honestly, man, when I went to that first church I was telling you about pastoring, I was 24. I tried to go to seminary on campus on Monday nights, and I just realized for me it was going to take like 10 years. Like, man, I can't do that. I'd already had one son. and I was married with a son, trying to pastor a church. And so I didn't go the traditional seminary route of moving on campus. I did my master's online. And you know, a lot of guys who moved and went to seminary, their networks, their friendships, their ministry family was who they developed relationships with in seminary. I didn't have that experience. Yeah. And so I had to find a network. And so the SBTC became that network. So at 24 years old, man, I was going to everything the SBTC had, you know, and wearing a three-piece suit at every bit of it, man. And so just trying to meet people, just trying to, and at 24, you know, a lot of guys come into ministry at 24 saying, man, I know how to do this. I didn't. Yeah. I had no idea. And so I would walk in the room with guys who I knew of their ministry, and I couldn't believe I was in the same room. Yeah. I remember even pastoring my first church, man, reading a book for seminary that was just biographies of Southern Baptist Convention presidents. And I remember reading that thinking to myself, I wonder if I'll ever get to meet an SBC president. I mean, it's just such a big ecosystem, it feels like. Yeah. And I feel like I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. No one knows me. No one cares. And obviously not true, but that's how I felt. Yeah. And so I'd come to Empower Conference. I'd come to the annual meeting. There were years that me and a friend would share hotel rooms in order to be able to go. Yeah. I mean, we did anything and everything we could to try to be there, to build relationships and friendships. And so what would begin to happen is somebody would say, hey, this is so-and-so, and introduce me, and I'd start talking about your church. Hey, what are you going through? What are you dealing with? I'm dealing with this. And just relationships and friendships begin to be built that way. So the SBC became my family. The SBTC really became my network, my relationships, my family. And that's why I'm so pro state convention as far as being able to build relationships. And then when I was at Malakoff, my second church, God just blessed, man. We saw a lot of people come to faith in Christ, a lot of baptisms happening. I don't have the gift of the evangelist. I'm not going to preach to 50 and 30 get saved. I wish anything I could, but that's not me. But what I can do is motivate people to be broken for lost people and to live sensitive to gospel opportunities and to be proactive in those opportunities. And so, man, God just showed up at our church, and I could do a whole podcast on how God showed up in that town, and it was incredible in the movement of God. And so I was on the executive board of the SBTC, and I was about to roll off. And I was 26 at the time, so I was about to I was 31 at the time, and I was about to roll off my last meeting. And so Dr. Richards at the time said, hey, I want to have lunch with you. And they were walking through some changes and shifts internally here, and so I thought maybe he wanted to get my opinion as a young guy going off the board. Yeah. And he just laid it out, and he kept saying, man, I need to replace this position. It was director of evangelism. And I said, I don't know of anybody, but I'll think of that. And he kind of laughed, and he said, no, I need to replace this position. I said, well, I understand that I don't know anyone. But I really will put some thought in it. And he laughed, and he looked at me and said, Nathan, I want you to consider, and it just was so off the cuff for me. But I tell you, Mitch, I probably hadn't shared this a lot, but one of the tools we created after I got here was called the One Cross app. That was birthed in my heart on the way home from that lunch meeting with Dr. Jim Richards. Wow. And God just began to flood my heart with ideas of how we could get the gospel out at an accelerated rate. And so went back, obviously talked to my wife, prayed through it, sought some counsel from people in my life, and just felt like, man, this is an opportunity to make a wider impact when it comes to the advancement of the gospel across Texas. And so, man, in fear and trembling, I stepped out and did it, had a time of my life. And so that's how I transitioned to denominational role. Have loved every second of it, not always easy. And my heart was always just to be a pastor. It's all I ever thought I was going to be. It's all I ever wanted to be. And so God had to begin to show me that I am pastoring just in a different way and a different people.
Hey, Nathan, this is not in the questions, but I think you'll be, I think this is softball for you. But one thing I've noticed is that, when you came in as evangelism director, you were replacing Don Cass, who'd been here for a while, very beloved, knows everybody. Now as you're replacing Dr. Jim Richards, very beloved, been around a while. Speak a little bit to just kind of honoring those that are before you, and because I just think you just do that really well.
Well, and I would tell you guys listening to this, it's safe to say you're probably younger than I am. One of the things I've always tried to do is to surround myself with three people. One, those who've gone before me, those who are coming alongside of me, same life stage, and those who are behind me in generation. But I've always really been intentional about putting people in my life who've gone before me. So some of the mentors that I've had, Rod Masteller, who was just like a father in the ministry, just passed away. Man, just I would talk to him on a weekly basis. I would ask questions. I'd ask him to pray for me. Ronnie Arbor, who was one of the founding guys of this convention. I was his pastor for 5 years, and I just continuously, in fact, still today, I talk to Ronnie almost every Monday morning, and always asking questions, and can kind of glean wisdom from him. Casey Perry, another founder of this convention, who was the pastor emeritus of Malakoff, is the reason I went to Malakoff. And so still call on him. And then, of course, Dr. Richards is who I would term as my father in the ministry, a mentor, a friend, and have learned just unbelievable amounts of ministry wisdom and strategy from him. But look, man, it's a biblical model, number one. You didn't find the young guys trying to jump in front of the older guys in Scripture. You found them learning from and waiting until God's timing was right.
That's the word.
And so I've always sought to really honor those who've gone before me because literally there wouldn't be a place for me had they not gone before me. And so I think, you find those people in your life. I really do. I feel sorry for pastors and leaders who do not have 1 to 2 older people in their life that can speak into their life. There's a lot of times where they change my mind. And so the tragedy is when we find them not useful anymore. I mean, this is crazy to me that there's collective wisdom and years of experience that people would just ignore. I want that wisdom so that I can then pour that into the generation that's behind me. And so try to always honor those guys and highlight how God has used them in their ministry and in your life. I've just never been intimidated by wanting to lift up somebody, and so I try to really do that. And I think God's really blessed it because I've learned a lot from men like that.
Never been intimidated by lifting up somebody. That's a good word, man. Well, that's good. Well, here we're going to get to, here in just a second, we're going to get to, how the convention plays a part in next generation. And I know that you're just kind of getting in here and back in Texas and in this role. But, as a convention, where do we kind of go from here as far as the next 20 years? Like, as far as convention life, does any of that need to change? Or when you kind of envision the future, what do you see with the SBTC?
Yeah, so I think any organization that wants to continue to make an impact in the culture in which God's called them and the time period in which God's allowed them has to change. I just think that the mistake we make is we believe that we have to turn it all upside down. And there are certain contexts that you have to. There are organizations that need to have that. But organizations like the SBTC doesn't need a full overhaul. They're being effective, but you have to always say, even in Acts where it says that David served the purpose for his generation, then he fell asleep. God appointed him at a certain time with a certain people in a certain culture to make an impact. And so, Mitch, I'm going to be ultimately responsible for the impact I make in my lifetime. And in order to do that, I've got to recognize I'm not the young guy anymore. I've got to recognize that, there are some 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds that are coming behind me who are going to have to reach a generation differently than I had to reach the generation when I was pastoring or leading. And so I think you always got to look forward. Obviously, you've heard this analogy before that the windshield is much larger than the rearview mirror because you don't spend as much time looking back as you do forward. And you don't drive a car looking in the rearview. And so I think going forward, you have to always understand there's always got to be change. But the change has to lead to advancement, not just change. Oftentimes we fall into the trap of changing because we don't like the terminology or we don't like the way. Look, it's got to have sustainable advancement of the gospel to be worthy change. And so in the next 20 years, we evolve, we change, we constantly are going back to the drawing board and saying culture is moving at such a fast rate that used to we would cast out 20-year visions or 10-year visions. Well, you can't even really do 5-year visions anymore. In fact, think about all those people that launched a vision in January of 2020. Everything they launched was pre-COVID. And so we're in a different world now where no one's the expert now. There were experts before, but no one's the expert now. COVID will be for our generation what the Great Depression was for its generation.
Yep.
It became a marker. Everything was then before the Depression or after Depression.
Yep.
So as we look at the landscape of the kingdom work and ministry, the local church, collegiate ministry, denominational life, everything will be, was that pre-COVID or post-COVID?
Yeah.
And so I think everybody at this point has to go back to the drawing board and say, how do we become the most effective post-COVID, post-pandemic, post-cultural transformation? How do we become as effective as we can moving forward? And, the organizations that are willing to look and to risk and to dare in order to make a greater impact, I think 20 years from now will still be relevant. But those who say, well, no, everything's going to get back to normal and we're not going to touch this, man, I don't think it's going to be back to normal. And that's not being pessimistic. I mean, I think culture has changed and shifted because of COVID.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, how do you think college ministry, next generation, how does this play a role in the future of SBTC? And I guess, what do you foresee as the involvement, or not, I mean, what we do here with Roundup Podcast and SBTC Collegiate, that's all part of the convention. But how do you see that going forward here with the convention and as far as its investment in those ministries?
Yeah, well, hey, man, you lead it. Maybe I should ask you that question.
That's right, man. You pay me to do that.
But it's a vital.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. Yeah. College years for me were so formative.
Yep.
Not only in helping me form what were my convictions, but really helping me to begin to realize how God had wired me and what He wired me to do. And so I think it's an absolute significant time period in the life of students. You're really transitioning as a college student from dependency to independency, from this is what I've always been taught, this is what I've got to learn, to now I have the ability to discover and create my own thoughts, convictions, desires, and whatnot. So those who are walking alongside of those students in some very formative years have such a significant role. So I see the collegiate ministry and the SBTC to do nothing but continue to advance and influence, coming alongside of churches. Of course, we're big here, as you know, on everything flowing through the local church. And so church-based collegiate ministry is so significant because not only are you reaching into a college campus, but there's ongoing discipleship. And so these students come to a church, they're hearing the same pastor over and over again. He's walking, he's shepherding, he's showing how to lead. And then there's people who walk alongside of them, love them. One of my favorite couples, I won't say their name, but they live here in Texas, and he was highly successful, and he holds leadership positions as a layperson in church. I was their interim pastor one time, and he said, hey, we do a Bible study on Sunday nights for young college students and professionals. Would you come? Well, man, I was thinking they're going to have chicken nuggets and mac and cheese and chips, and there'll be 10 of us there.
Yeah.
I mean, I walk in, there's like 40 or 50 in this house, massive full-blown dinner. These people are studying to be lawyers, doctors, and they were different ethnicities, from different countries, different language groups. There was even non-Christians, specific people groups there, and this husband and this wife, who were at that time in their mid-60s.
Wow.
They weren't looking for a title. They weren't looking but what they were looking to do is impact collegiate students and young leaders as they were in that transition of life to become who they were going to be. Yeah. And they were pouring themselves out. And I think that only happens through a church-based model. Yeah. And so that's what I love about the SBTC and the collegiate ministry you're leading is that we want everything to flow through the local church because, listen, that's where God's people who He has equipped, they're at. And that's not to say that other models aren't working or aren't helpful. I just believe any model that goes through the local church is probably the best model for making disciples. And so, man, I see a great future of it. And, I see as long as you're leading it, we've got a bright future in helping collegiate students.
I appreciate that. That's a good word. Well, I got one more question here for you, and it's a fun question. If you got a free day with no responsibilities, what are you doing for fun?
Yeah, so it depends on what time of the year. So number one, the most fun I have is anytime I'm with my wife. And so if she and I can go on a date, That's going to be.
Yep.
Second to that, and depending on what season is going to be, two of my boys at this point are in football and soccer and whatnot, and there's nothing I would rather do besides being with my wife. There's nothing I'd rather do than watch my kids in sports. I pour hours at their practices, or it doesn't matter to me, man. If it's practice, if it's a scrimmage, if it's a game, I want to be there, and I just want to be on the sideline. And so those two things are my absolute favorite things to do. And so if I had a day, no time constraints, I would wake up, spend my time with the Lord, take my wife to breakfast, spend the morning with her, and sometime that afternoon or evening be at some kind of sports activity with my kids. And that's, to me, the best thing there is to do in my life. So
awesome, man. Yeah. That's good stuff, Nathan. Well, Nathan, man, I appreciate you jumping on with us today. I believe in what we do here at the SBTC, and, just thankful for the SBTC's investment in next generation ministry, particularly college. And, this goes all the way back to, you giving me a shot 5 years ago in this role, and just to see God just use it and man, get to resource churches. So it's been a blessing. So I wanted our audience to get to know you and kind of get to know your vision for this, but also just you personally. So thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, and happy to serve in any way. You're doing a great job. You guys who are out there listening to this, man, just know we're here for you. We want to walk alongside of you. We love you. We believe in you and what you're doing. And so, man, let us know how we can lock arms with you and help see the gospel advance. And, man, I believe there's great, great days ahead. And so keep going, keep fighting, keep walking, and know that you've got a cheerleader here, and we believe in you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Nathan. We'll see you, man.
All right.
Well, friends, thanks for joining us today on the Roundup Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Do not forget to follow us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at SBTC Collegiate, and join our Facebook group, the Roundup Network. There's a host of other leaders in there to idea share with, just to talk to. It's a great time. Join us there. And don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast. Please share it with somebody that may have some interest in it. We want to be a resource to each other. So, friends, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.